So I would just like to welcome all of you. My name's Rebecca, and I was part of the Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp, and and I'm kind of coordinating these 40th anniversary Greenham Weaving the Webinar series, which has already had several lovely webinars, which you can find the recordings of up on the Greenham Women Everywhere website. We've talked about, feminist disarmament from Greenham to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that just entered into force in January. We have had 2 on Pacific Women Speak Out, and also Pacific Women, while a lot of us were gathering at Greenham for the actual 40th anniversary on the 4th and 5th of September. Pacific Women and others who couldn't be there were gathering around the fireside hosted by Zol Deishtar. We've had a webinar in which Ian Sabate updated us all in what was happening at on the indigenous land belonging to the Western Shoshone that had been taken over for the Nevada test site, where not only the United States, but also the UK from 1958 onwards conducted nuclear weapon testing, and where there's nuclear waste dumping, or at least there's attempts to dump nuclear waste and so on. So there's been a whole series. And this one I'm just absolutely delighted about is about women who are part of traveller communities. And just to explain where there's a connection with Greenham, is that the area of Greenham Common and also Crookham Common, which is just to the east of Greenham, have been part of the areas where traveller communities have traveled to, stopped, stayed, so on, for generations going back actually really quite a long way. And indeed, there was traveller communities who were at Greengate during the first period of time, in the first few months. Travellers were some of the first people to welcome when the Women for Life on Earth March arrived at Greenham on the 5th of September, and then the Peace Camp was born. And then after the Peace Camp was made women only, my understanding is that the traveller communities really respected that, and instead of camping at their usual place, which was up the lane of Greengate, would camp at Crookham Common, which is just a couple, less than a mile away. So this is a connection that is actually was really part of Greenham. And for some of us, I mean, it was how we first learned how to make benders that actually kept the rain out. So I just wanted to sort of open it with that introduction. And now I want to turn it over to Lou, who with Amy and Jelly are coordinating the rest of this webinar. And I'm going to turn my face off at this point and just say over to you then. I'm really excited that you're here, really looking forward to hearing what you're going to talk to us about.
Hi, thank you, Rebecca. I'm Lou and I'm a traveller, and I came together with Amy and Jelly as part of the nfATS collective, which we're going to talk a bit about later on. The reason we've been so we're doing this webinar is because at the moment the government are changing the laws, and there's a police courts crime and sentencing bill that's going through Parliament at the moment, and is currently in the House of Lords. And you've probably heard about it, but it's causing some the things that they hope to bring in or plan to bring in are actually going to really impact upon our lives as travellers. So we're going to talk a little bit about ourselves, we're going to talk about the bill, and we're going to talk about the things that we've been doing and what nfATS been doing, and we're going to bring in some other traveller projects, just so we can show you what we're all about. So I'll just introduce you to, I'll hand over to Amy. And she can tell you about what we're doing.
Hi, I'm Amy. So I'm going to start with just telling you a little bit about myself and my story. I've got some photos, so I'm going to attempt a bit of a screen share PowerPoint thing as well. So we'll see how that goes. So hi, I'm Amy. I'm a new traveller and I'm a single mum to 2 boys who've grown up living in our truck. And I'm also the maker of a podcast called I Choose the Road podcast. So I didn't come to being a new traveller in an intentional way. I didn't see a bunch of travellers driving down the road and think, hi, that's the life for me. I have lived this way for over 20 years, and for most of that time, it has been an intentional choice. As soon as I came to realise what this lifestyle offers in terms of community and in terms of freedom, I realised that I couldn't think of a better way to live my life. So I was 19 when I bought my first living vehicle. Well, when I say there were actually 4 of us. We were students and we wanted to take a year out from university and travel around Ireland and get involved in some of the protest camps which were happening there at the time, one of them being Ben and the Downs, which was quite well known. As it turned out, 2 couples living in a 4-day series van with an easy start addiction didn't work out so well. So after a few months, my boyfriend and I got involved in setting up a protest camp in Ireland against some pylons in Cork Harbour. And we moved into benders and tree houses. You know, in the spirit of the Greenham women, we also did a similar thing. And it was actually a successful campaign and they didn't build those pylons. After a year out, we returned to university and houses. But then after our studies ended, we moved to London. Although we initially lived in a flat in London, we soon realised we'd be better off in a van. So we bought a transit van and moved on to site in Stoke Newington. So I'm just going to try and show you a little picture of, oh, can you see that? No, can you see that? Where do I do share screen? This one, no. So that is myself and my partner at the time and our first vehicle that we lived in Ireland all those years ago. Now I can stop sharing the screen and carry on talking. So then we moved on to a traveller site in Stoke Newington, and this was my first taste of site life. And although it's very different to the often moving convoys of the 80s, I immediately felt that this was the way I wanted to live. For me, it was a perfect combination of community and having your own space. Living with close neighbours in a mutually supportive environment, often with a common aim, but without having to share a kitchen with anyone, and always being able to shut your door and have some private time whenever you needed. During that time, I always lived with other activists and was involved in lots of direct action. Summit mobilisations were a big thing, going to visiting the G8 when it happened in France and in Italy and Germany. Reclaim the Streets, which was obviously a big movement in the 90s. And I was involved in the pink and silver samba band, Rhythms of Resistance. There are all sorts of ways that new travellers come to this life, out of a desire to escape the system, from the free party scene often, sometimes and probably more recently from financial necessity as housing becomes harder and harder to find and maintain, and from the protest movement. Many of the people I lived with, hang on, just try and get this to go down. Many of the people I lived with back then had come from the road protest movement in the camps of the 90s. And it's for this reason, I think there was a strong current of resistance running through our communities and through the new traveller scene. Over the years, I've lived in a lot of different flavours of traveller sites, some more functioning than others, but always with a strong sense of community and people being there for you when it really counted. At their best, I think of a UK traveller site like an old-fashioned village. Individual homes, but with close neighbours who are always there to help each other out, cook each other dinner, light each other's burners if you're coming home late, support each other, and where possible, work through problems and differences. And with a shared identity and interest in keeping our home safe and a good place to be. They say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, I feel like my children really are being raised in a wonderful village. They've both lived on site, either here or in Spain, all their lives, and the benefits they've got from this are innumerable. A whole collection of different people with different skills and interests to learn from, a safe environment to test their independence and develop it, and the opportunity to form relationships with other adults on their own terms, not just their friends' parents or their parents' friends, but actual, real, meaningful two-way friendships with grown-ups which are outside of the immediate family. Although I say that, sight so often feels like a big family, and our scene, our wider community, we also refer to as the family. So we are a family within a family within a family, and I feel grateful for this every single day. I'm just going to show you another slide, if I can do it. Let's see if it, so here's a few pictures. This is my son when he was a baby, my older son when he was 1, on his first birthday on the site we lived on then. And then on the other side, there's us 3 now in our truck on the site we live on at the moment. And a couple of pictures of the garden that we've got going on in our truck with a cherry tree next to it. So another thing that's been very important to me over the years is that we are nearly always squatting, living on occupied land at the edges of towns and villages. I've spent some time living on a rented yard, and sometimes I live on land owned by a friend, especially when we're in Spain. But for the majority of the time, I've lived on unused land at the edge of towns and villages. And I've come to realise recently, actually, that this actually forms quite a large part of my identity, that land ownership, property ownership, not even by someone else and just rented by me, has been circumnavigated. But I haven't had to engage in a system of land ownership that I have always believed is inherently wrong. Of course, I do sometimes crave the security and permanence of living on some owned land, especially the opportunity to grow and to build. But this is always balanced against the feeling most comfortable politically as a squatter. And I think now we're going to hear from Jelly.
Just unmute myself. Yeah, I'm going to do a bit of an introduction about my, growing up as a new traveller. My name's Jemima, but I was given the nickname Jelly as a baby, and that's always stuck, and everyone's always called me Jelly. I was born in 1989 when my mum was 19 and my dad was 21 in a cottage hospital in Yeovil before returning to our unauthorised site nearby. My mum had gone on the road as a teenager after meeting other hunt saboteurs, including my dad, who were living in vehicles. My dad soon moved off the road and moved into a squat in Bristol before he became a homeowner in Bristol. So I grew up living with my mum, travelling around the south of the UK and living on unauthorised sites. Right, I'm going to see if I can do my slides. I need to... Okay, so at the time when I was growing up, we were branded by the media and politicians as new age travellers, but I don't think that as a child I ever felt that I identified as anything in particular, and I don't know if those that we lived alongside had realised when they embarked on this way of life that they would become such a cultural group that would be heavily vilified by the media and attacked by legislation directed at them. And also at the illegal raves which had become part of our culture. The illegal raves at the time weren't part of all new traveller culture, but they were certainly part of my culture as I was growing up. And those pictures there are from some sites and parties when I was younger. The illegal raves in the late 80s and 90s had surely been influenced by the illegal raves in the late 80s and 90s had surely been influenced by the huge free festivals which had occurred before them. Looking back into the emerging new traveller culture in the 70s and 80s, there were always themes of resistance, freedom and autonomy. From creating large-scale free festivals to becoming a peace convoy which became involved with peace camps like Molesworth and Greenham. I also think that our experience of such environments later stood us in good stead for helping out at large events, such as Glastonbury Festival and during the ongoing refugee crisis. Many of those who were part of new traveller culture quickly began organising and providing aid on the ground at refugee camps, and have continued to do so for the last 10 years. As a child, I was taken to demonstrations against the poll tax and criminal justice bill, both of which turned into riots, which shocked my mum. But the police response to those protests and the increasing evictions that we experienced by the police showed us that in general they were not on our side, and it was part of their duty to get rid of us. A great illustration of that era in the 90s, when we were taken to the protests as kids, is in the lyrics by new traveller hip hop artist Smellington Piff in his song Riot Children. And there's a photo there from one of the criminal justice bill protests I went to as a child. And I'm just going to play the first half of the track by Smellington Piff in his video here. And I've got the lyrics on the screen as well.
It's our history we must make. Let's make riot children raise up your fist. Let them know we don't take no shit. Loot it, take what's yours. Number 10, we're gonna kick through the door. Fuck your lord, fuck your lord, don't rule us. We watched the riots from our friends. We were young then, some scrubby little stairways. I never asked why police were beating down on people. I just knew deep inside that we were seen as equal. I saw the devil as a child who policed the evil. I see what happens when the power gets manipulated. We were racially abused by the other kids, cause we were mundane hippies wearing scruffy kicks. Dirty pikey, my mommy says it's trouble. My daddy said you must have washed your face in the puddle. Yeah, I'm proud of my heritage. I've learned lessons in my life that you never will. My work's my bond and blood runs deep. I'm as real as the company I keep. I've learned that family is everything and more. Children of the rise, raise a fist for the cause. Come on, riot children, march through the gate. It's our history we must make. Let's make riot children raise up your fist. Let them know we don't take no shit. Loot it, take what's yours. Number 10, we're gonna kick through the door. Fuck your lord, fuck your lord, don't rule us.
All right, I'm just gonna stop the video. Oh, stop the video there. So when I was little, I didn't really understand what the protests were about, but I think it was valuable to learn the right to protest at a young age. And it was only when I went to university as an adult and looked into it as part of my degree that I actually began to understand what the criminal justice bill was about and why we had been against it. I found it fascinating and had a huge moment of realization when I read how it had criminalized our way of life and thought, well, that's why we were in the streets protesting. The criminal justice bill did make it easier for the police to move us on. And as a result, I attended 9 primary schools between the age of 5 and 10. It was little wonder that my mum was fed up with moving and also with lack of decent sites. And so we moved into a house where we could settle and I could attend secondary school for the entirety, which I did. As an adult, I started writing poetry about my experiences and life on the road. My friend Soma and I recently published a poetry, photo and art book called Thoughts of Freedom to raise money for charity. Here is a poem from the book, which I wrote about being moved on by the police. The slide that I'll show in a minute shows the poem in our book, which includes a photo with I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it, but a photo of us on a local common getting evicted I'm in the corner. And I still park on that common regularly today. So that slide up. So this is my poem and it's called Shit, It's the Police. From quite a young age, when I heard sirens, I thought, shit, it's the police. And that fear is still instilled in me, even when I'm all legal and I've got no reason to be. I guess it's from back in the day when they used to move us from pillar to post. But what they didn't know is that as a kid, moving on in the night is what I loved the most. Waking up in the morning in new places, still feeling safe as long as there were loads of familiar faces. They would pull up in their white shiny cars and wade through a field of dirty kids, saying, "Mister, mister, are you really called the Pigs?" I'm sure there were some exceptions, but in the most part they showed no compassion, just citing their laws, giving eviction orders and regulation answers in a familiar fashion. So when I moved into a house and we became sedentary, when I heard sirens, I still thought, shit, it's the police. But something happened, and over time these fears subsided, because in a little Devon town I never saw the police and I didn't hear the sirens. Until one day I was old enough to drive my own box on wheels, and I started to get a sense of remembering how it feels. Because surprise, surprise, I started to see the police a little bit more often, stopping me occasionally for pretty much no reason. And just like before, it seems to happen more in the summer season. But I suppose this experience might have given me some advantage, because some people, when they see the police and they hear the sirens, they get the urge to fight them because they know what the police are like. But I'll probably just cite the law, give them some regulation answers and just be polite and smile sweetly, at least until they're out of sight. So after school, I went to uni to study health and social care, and I got my driving license when I finished uni and bought my first living vehicle as an adult. And I was helped to convert it by a family friend who soon became my partner. Over the years, we've upsized to a 3.5 ton vehicle, and then I got my HGV license and now live in a 7.5 ton converted horse box with our 3-year-old daughter. Over the last 10 years, we've mostly parked up on our own, rotating different spots around our local town of Stroud, where we have chosen to stay due to connections with family and friends here. When I became pregnant with my daughter, I put my name down for the nearest suitable council-run traveller sites, one in Exeter and one in Bath. However, no pictures have become available over the 4 years that I've been on those lists, and if we were to be offered a pitch, I'm not sure I would take it, as the rent is quite high, similar to a small flat. There would be bills for things we don't actually use, and we'd have to leave our jobs, friends, family, and my daughter's education, which are all local to where we are now, which just doesn't seem worth it. I think next we're going to show some information about the police crime, sentencing and court spill, and explain a bit about what it's about.
Me first. Can I have my go?
Okay, Lou is going to talk.
It's all right. I just that's coming in a bit with police crime and courts and sentencing. Okay, so as I said, I'm Lou and I'm part of the nfATS collective and the Drive to Survive movement. I'm a traveller and I chose to go on the road about 20 years ago, and since then I've been living in a variety of vehicles, predominantly in the UK. I chose this pathway because as a single mother, this society was not making me happy. In fact, it was making me quite ill. Despite the fact that I had a professional career as a social worker, an affordable flat in central London, and many friends, this life was just not working for me at all. Every summer I'd go away and then I'd come back at the end of summer so my daughter could return to school, and just realise that living in a flat on my own, well, with my daughter, was in an isolated flat, just TV for company in the evening. It just wasn't a sustainable life for me. So I ended up taking the plunge and moving into a Dodge 50. Living on the road, it wasn't easy. I found it hard at first, I arrived thinking I knew everything, and quickly it became apparent that I knew very little. Initially, simple matters like collecting my wood and water, the essentials for survival, took up most of my time. Since then, I've learned electricity, I've learned vehicle mechanics, and I've learned how to build a fire and cook on the fire, and loads more skills that I'm so grateful that I've picked up along the road. well, living with nature, the seasons and our British weather, they've given me really deep understandings that I would never ever have been aware of if I'd have remained in bricks and mortar. And so, yeah, I'm truly grateful for the stars and the moon and everything that I get to see from not being, from being living out more outside. So the other great thing, of course, is learning to live in a community. There's so many different diverse personalities and people on the road, and living in a community, that's a whole learning in itself. You know, about ourselves and about others and how we work together. So for me, sight is the closest thing I've ever experienced to a tribe, and it can be really beautiful. The support it offers to everyone, the friendships that grow over time, and the sharing of skills and knowledge. You know, there are so many talented, wise travellers on the road that you know we've just learned how to do things because we have to, and yeah, it's amazing the knowledge that's there. And one of the really special things is being able to watch our children grow into and become adults over the years, you know, making their own lives, you know. That's really, really powerful, and yeah, it's lovely. So, as well as being a traveller, I've also been a committed activist. I first became political in 1991 when the first Gulf War started. The realisation that my youngest brother could be like enlisted and called to fight was horrifying. And you know, luckily for us in the UK and in the West, that doesn't happen now. But despite that, I continue to fight for peace and an end to war and violence and lethal weapons. So over the years, I've joined many campaigns, protecting the land, protecting the animals, protecting human rights. Sometimes I've lived on protest sites, sometimes I've just visited for a specific action. I've marched, I've campaigned, I've locked on, I've partied and I've protested, and sometimes it's worked, but many times it hasn't. So despite this, I still continue using non-violent direct action. Although I'm also looking into other ways of getting our message across, you know, using other mediums like drama and art and music, and because we really need to wake up the masses at the moment. But however, I'm still going to continue with this non-violent direct action because even in my short lifetime, I've seen change on every level. One of the great things about activism is it's enabled me to meet other people who really care deeply and think about our planet, and they care enough to act. And so I've formed some amazing friendships, and I've been able to learn about the true realities of life in this country and on this planet through the exchange of knowledge and information that we all have when we get together. So yeah, so on these occasions, I've always fought for others. But now, though, with this police crime courts and sentencing bill, I am fighting for myself, not just for others' rights, but for myself, for my right to exist as a traveller. And I'm deeply concerned about this law and if it's passed and how it's going to impact on my ability to travel and live the life the way that I do. You know, I first found out that the Tories planned to criminalise trespass in 2018. But I never actually believed it was possible. A friend of mine's told me they've tried to criminalise trespass about 3 times in her lifetime, and they've never succeeded. But now it's looking quite likely that it is going to go through. For me and for all travellers, trespass is a necessary part of our life. There are council provided sites, but these are far and few between. And as Jelly said, the waiting list is always long, and they're also expensive and often really, really poorly maintained. The councils kind of treat travellers as like the last people to actually bother to do any repairs and things like that. So yeah, and they're also expensive. I mean, I live on quite a low income because my expenses are very small. You know, I just keep my truck legal, and I you know, I'm not buying into all the corporate commercial things that a lot of people do buy. So, but if I was moving on to a council site, then that would mean that I wouldn't be able to live, you know, taking jobs when I needed to, but taking the time so that I can actually get on with things that are interesting in my life. You know, without having a huge income. So if it wasn't possible for me to live this way, then I would have to go back on the benefits system again, and that would tie me into the system. When for me, the freedom to opt out of the benefits system in the past meant that my mental health dramatically improved once I no longer had to engage with the benefits agency. So the other thing is that if you look around the country, you'll see there's countless bits of land, and some of these were traditional parking places, and they've been blocked off. You know, if you're driving along the road, you'll see lay-bys, common land, old roads that have been banked off, had blocks put in front of them. And these were traditional park-ups that we no longer have access to. So as travellers, we've been forced to move into places that were disused and abandoned, the locked up properties and land that nobody wants and nobody is using. It's been great, actually. I mean, trespassing, I've lived in abandoned hospitals, fire stations, old pubs, pub gardens, warehouse complexes, community centres, forests and racetracks. You know, like, I've been so honoured and so lucky to live in these really amazing places. These all become my home whilst I've been there. But obviously we eventually get evicted when the property developer takes our home and develops the land into building it for new houses. So over the years, more and more laws have been passed that restrict our access to the land. And whilst the Abhorrent Criminal Justice Act in 1994 made, amongst other things, travelling and parking together in large groups more difficult, this new police courts crime and sentencing bill that the government is hoping to pass through Parliament, this further puts further restrictions on our way of life, and we are now at risk of losing our homes, facing huge fines and even imprisonment just for trying to make our life somewhere. So now I'm going to pass over to Jelly and Amy, and they're going to explain to you about the law.
Hi. Yeah, so one of the major things that's facing new travellers at the moment is this police crime courts and sentencing bill, section 4 of which is known as the criminalisation of trespass. So we're going to go through that and talk a little bit about what it means. And I reckon we can I've got it, Jelly, you don't have to hold up your phone. I've got it. It's here. No? Yes? Okay. Right, so you might have heard about the policing bill. The limitations to legitimate protest have been widely publicised. Less well known is section 4, which seeks to criminalise the lives of travellers of all ethnicities by making trespass with a vehicle and the intent to reside in that vehicle into an illegal act. So the definition of vehicle has been changed here from the previous legislation in the 1994 CJA that incorporate wagons, caravans, and all sorts of dwellings which travellers have chosen to make their homes. It even includes tents, actually, I think. So it says, yeah, caravan means any structure, even habitation, is capable of being moved from one place to another. So that's an awful lot of things that mainly only travellers are living in. So also within these proposals, in order for the trespasser to be held as criminal, there must be significant damage, disruption, or distress, or more importantly, the likelihood of those things to happen. So the term damage is vague, and it could be something as simple as damage to the past, damage to some part, damage to a tree. So it's not like you have to actually be, committing full-on trashing things for that to happen. Go on. So, oh, hang on, that's right. Did it. Disruption is another one that is one of the terms for the criminalisation, which is also another vague term, and it as it says here, an interference with the person's ability to access any services or facilities located on that land. Translated, that could mean a dog walker who doesn't want to walk past because of their views or beliefs and the myths around travellers and their antisocial behaviour. And then we've also got distress. Again, another vague term by which the bias and prejudice against travellers could easily be played out. So the problem with all of these three things, apart from the obvious, is that it also the wording also includes the likelihood of. So a landowner or the agent of the landowner could say, I think that these people have to move because I think they have intent to reside, and there is the likelihood of them causing distress. So that could be something as vague as that person might upset somebody who walks past, that person might leave some rubbish. So this is what I'm saying about the bias and the prejudice, which is very strong and has been built up by the media and in fact for a long time before then. Bias against travellers and nomadic people can easily be played out through the law and the vague wording of this law. Penalties not moving when you are told to move are severe. You can be fined up to £2,500, be imprisoned for up to 3 months, and your vehicle could be seized, which of course is very likely to be your home. The repercussions for these penalties, as you can imagine, roll out even further. So if a family is parked, say, for example, in a lay-by, and they are asked to move within a 2-hour time frame, but they're not able to do that for any reason, be it they can't get it together, their vehicle might not be working, they might have to wait for someone to come home from work so that they've got the driver present. All these sorts of reasons. If they don't move when they're told to move, they are then criminalised. They then become a criminal and they're liable for these penalties, one of which is your home being taken. If you're a family and your home is taken from you, what's going to happen next? You're then homeless, your children will be taken from you. Results, obviously, massive trauma for the children, trauma for the family, children being put into care. And then there's a family which is then thrust upon the social housing system, which is already under immense pressure. And from people who want to live in houses, new travellers are people who have chosen to live in a different way so they don't rely on the system. And this is actually just tipping us out of our self-reliance and pushing us back into a system which can't cope. Shirley.
Okay, so the Community Law Partnership and the Select Committee and the Select Committee and the European Commission of Human Rights, alongside organisations such as Liberty, have all expressed that they believe the bill breaches human rights. And if you move on to the next slide, the lack of stopping places are another problem with the bill. It does nothing to address issues such as the lack of authorised stopping places and the fact that there's a complete lack of support from the public, and also quite a lack of support from the police who will have to enforce it. I'm going to move on and talk a bit about how the police crime sentencing and courts bill will affect me. When I first heard about the I keep calling it the criminal justice bill, but it's because it reminded me so much of that act when I read it, the police crime sentencing and courts bill, and it is essentially just amendments to the criminal justice bill when it comes to all the bits that criminalise unauthorised stopping places and give more powers to evict. And as we travel with only 2 vehicles, a truck and a car, and we move regularly, we've usually been left alone by the authorities. But we have noticed that as soon as a couple of friends join us with their vehicles, we are noticed a lot quicker and given notice to leave a lot quicker as well. And that is a real shame. Like I said, we haven't managed to find anywhere on an authorised or unauthorised site, and we travel on our own. And I wish that we could find somewhere with that community that you guys have been talking about. It obviously, we have this big family of people I've known since I was a child, but we don't live with people, which is a shame, as I'd like my daughter to grow up with more of a community like that around her, like I did when I was growing up. And as the new law criminalises 2 or more vehicles, it would directly affect us, as if the police used it to evict us regularly. It would affect our ability to get to work. We move around spots in the local area. Like you said, the new law means that you can't go back to the same spot if you're evicted from it for 12 months instead of 3. So it would make it a lot harder for us to stay in our jobs, for my daughter to access education, and even to just access basic amenities like filling up our water and stuff like that. So what are we doing in protest and in opposition to the PCSC bill? We go to demonstrations when we can. We march outside Parliament so that they know we don't consent to this law. I've added some photos of my family and I protesting at marches in Bristol and London, with my daughter with us there as well. And also, obviously, with a small child in nursery and jobs to get to, it's not always possible to get to big demos. So we also have been making signs and banners at home and putting them up locally. And we also continue to live roadside, obviously, and I've put signs up outside our truck before, like that one, and that does invite conversations with members of the public about what the PCSC bill is and why it affects us. And I have been heartened by conversations where people have started with negative opinions of us due to prejudices and preconceptions they might have, but they then leave changing their minds after I've explained who we are, what we stand for, why I've got these signs outside, and how this law would criminalise us as a family and stop us being able to contribute to our local communities. And then they usually end up realising that they actually agree with us. I've also spent some time writing to MPs and to the Lords, and others can do the same by doing that online. There are lots of online tools for writing to MPs and writing to the Lords to try and give them some influence and let them know that there are people out there who don't agree. So next we're going to talk about your podcast, Amy.
So for me, one of the things that I have done in response to the bill was I started a podcast. I've never done anything like that before. I got a microphone and, well, basically, I wanted primarily to make something that would help to inform people of the bill, other travellers, and of its implications, of its development, of, to try and untangle the legal language so that it was more accessible for people to understand. But as I began to think more about it, I felt it could be more than that. And so the podcast has actually grown from just being specifically about the bill and travellers to about new traveller culture, to reporting on other traveller issues, to celebrating and exploring our culture, having important discussions. I feel that in reflecting our culture, we strengthen it, and in strengthening it, we are more of a thing to be wiped away. So I feel like this is a good way to explore it, and call it a culture, and claim that as a thing that we are, that we do, that we've chosen. And many people are 3rd, 4th generation, 2nd generation, but the ones of us who've chosen it, we're still allowed to claim it as a culture. So I think Jelly's going to play a little clip of part of the podcast.
Yeah, where am I? There we go.
It's oppression, it's fascism, it's racism against a cultural heritage that's been going on for a very, very long time.
That's pretty awful. It's like, you know, it's worrying. It makes me angry. It makes me fearful for lots of other people who aren't in necessarily as good a position as we are, because our vehicle still works, it's still roadworthy, it's still, like, you know, legal on the road. But a lot of people, they don't have that option. And actually, a lot of people, it's one step away from homelessness, really. So it's like it could affect, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people.
I feel scared, angry, and sad. I feel like this bill is attacking certain parts of society that other maybe wealthy and more privileged people in the society find unsightly, but it's not addressing any of the actual problems on either side.
My father is still living in a trailer, and him not being able to move around and take away his roots. He's been doing it for a long time, and we've done it peacefully. We've done it peacefully all through my life. We've moved all over the place. When I was younger, we were horse-drawn, and to take that away from people is taking away their homes, and it's just not fair. It's just not okay. I just think it's wrong. I don't think it's right that they can shut down such a big movement. It's a culture. They need to look into it deeper. How dare they? Who are they to say that we can't live the way that we want to live? It's not okay.
Well, pretty angry and annoyed that I don't have control over the decisions that I want to make. So
Can't really live, we can't work, can't be. Like, what do we do? Yeah, it's not just for me, it's for the ability for us to be able to live on the road changed our lives. It meant that we could cut our overheads, we could spend our time with our family and kids, and we could be free. And it takes that away from anybody in the future to be able to do that. So it's not just about me, it's about everybody. It takes the rights away from everyone to just live how they believe. Start crying.
So, although the podcast is made for and about new travellers, and a big part of my aim is to be able to give each other a voice, another part of it is to add to the wealth of positive news about new travellers, which there's been a flood of, actually, in response to the draconian measures in the bill. You know, one of the ways we're going to fight this bill is by actually changing people's hearts and changing people's opinion of travellers and showing them that we are actually contribute a lot to society, that we've got a lot of creativity to give, that we've got a lot of a lot to give to society, and that we're not this sort of messy, nasty sort of group of people that we are made out to be. So that's part of my reason for doing the podcast as well. So now we're going to hear from, hang on, am I not still screen sharing, am I? Am I still screen sharing?
No.
Okay, I can't get out of this. I am still screen sharing.
Are you?
Can you see me, or can you see that?
I can see you.
Oh, okay,
Yes,
cool.
you're screen sharing.
So now we're going to introduce a few little snippets of some other projects that are run by travellers, women travellers, that are also helping to change traveller prejudice and helping to change people's hearts and minds about travellers. I mean, I can't get out of that.
Education was set up as a therapeutic and educational community interest company as a community project, which we started off doing week-long family camps in Devon. So coming together in skill sharing. For me, I know the way that I learned was I couldn't just do something once. I had to be able to go over it and over it again. And we felt like it had the time to really hone into those skills. And put the time in to develop them, but offer a really wide range of skills to suit and cover everybody that was coming to the camps. The people that come to the camps are from a really diverse range of backgrounds, and initially it was about bringing together people from the travelling community to be able to showpiece their skills and share that with the wider community and break down barriers between the settled and the nomadic community, and also dispel some of the myths that were, and the prejudices that were prevalent and still are prevalent at this time. And then the project developed into having our own forest school locally, where we were getting children referred with various different needs, from care and adoption, the youth offending team, kids that weren't thriving in mainstream school, reconnecting with themselves, reconnecting with their nature, reconnecting with their bodies through song, through drama, through play, through pragmatic skills, life skills, has always been the main focus for education. The aims have been developing resilience in our young people and our adults. I think in what's happening right now, social, emotional, mental and physical well-being is a top priority right now. I think it's really important that we remember that actually our traditional rural skills, our environmental awareness, our outdoor learning is all a massive part for us in terms of like travelling life and how we live, and then sharing that with the wider community. For us at education, it's about coming back into arts and crafts and land-based education, and within that being very much a therapeutic space to just be. Education was set up.
Okay.
What is HACK? Horse and Community is an umbrella term for ways to reintegrate the horse into the daily lives of a community. This is on the road, it's on sites in particular. Why did I set it up, and what are my intentions for the project? Well, it was set up because I felt inspired to share my experiences and knowledge and incorporate ideas for future solutions in horse husbandry and keeping horses in smaller, perhaps not necessarily so-called suitable environments. Horse and Community HACK seek to inspire and create opportunities for all ages and abilities to partake, practice and learn how to observe and interact with horses. So we can include here permaculture, land management, natural sustainable horse husbandry, equine assisted therapy, youth work, delivery services, outreach to vulnerable groups and individuals, animal welfare, high on the list, plant knowledge and nutrition. All of this links to skills such as rope making, woodworking, leatherworking. What is HACK?
I'm sorry, it went back to the beginning then, so I'll finish it rather than going back to the beginning, because I don't think I can get it to the same place. So I'll move on to the next one, which is Vehicles for Change, and this is RE.
Okay, so what is Vehicles for Change? So we're a group of people who live or have lived in vehicles, coming from various cultural and economic backgrounds. After a couple of community meetings, we became a non-profit community interest company. That was in February 2020, just before the lockdown. We wanted to bring people together in order to protect and advance the rights of all people living in vehicles who are affected by heavy enforcement measures, and that's regardless of ethnic, economic or cultural background. We came together in response to a new enforcement policy for people living in vehicles in Bristol. The policy basically brought about a new system of surveillance. It actually included the use of injunctions, which involves banning all people from living in vehicles in significant parts of the city. So this would basically affect anyone living in a vehicle, regardless of their background. For us, this was particularly alarming because we had the national criminalisation of trespass on the horizon as well. So we felt that it would be good to bring people together, bring everyone together who's affected by these enforcement policies in order to contest them and to work on positive alternative solutions as a unified network. Despite significant challenges, I feel we have made some progress in this area. The pandemic restricted our ability to organise community face-to-face meetings for a long time, and it was hard working digitally, but we consulted our community network the best we could digitally and pushed for Bristol City Council to provide authorised sites during the COVID pandemic for those who wanted them. And we also supported people from our network to contest an area-wide injunction, St Werburgh's, last summer. So effectively preserving the place of those living in vehicles in this area and beyond. We expect that if this had gone through, we would have seen a ripple-out effect, and that would have potentially been beyond Bristol as well. Generally on a broader scale, a lot of court cases against area-wide injunctions were carried out, and as a result, the High Court have actually outlawed them now, so that's really good. I think that sends a really strong message out against enforcement policies that are inherently prejudiced towards travellers. We're continuing to push for positive alternatives to enforcement on a local level. So what we're trying to develop at the moment are conflict resolution processes, which could supplement the immediate use of evictions if they are desired. We're now working with other organisations and campaigns that are working more broadly against the national criminalisation of trespass. So that includes the GREAT team in Bristol. So the GREAT team is GR8T+, and that's bringing together different traveller and vehicle dwelling groups. So that's Roma, Irish, New Travellers, Boaters, Show People, as well as other vehicle dwelling folk. That's been very much facilitated by Stand Up Against Racism and Inequality, and then also Drive to Survive as well. We just see it as many different people have been living in vehicles for various cultural and economic reasons all over the world and throughout time. We want to work together to protect this way of life in all its forms and variations. Okay, so what is...
Okay, now we're going to move on to some audio from Sherry and her daughter Ruby Smith from Drive to Survive.
Sherry Smith was born and raised in a traditional Roman Egyptian family. She is an academic, an educator, an activist, single mum to two amazing young women, and co-founder of Drive to Survive. We are also joined by one of Sherry's daughters, Ruby, who is an activist herself and also a student of journalism at the University in Liverpool. Welcome, Sherry and Ruby. Hi. Hi. Thank you. So, Sherry, tell me something about your story. You originally trained as a florist.
Yeah, so I'm a Romany gypsy. I was raised in North London on the borders of Hertfordshire. I was raised in a house. My nan went into a house when she was having my dad. They shut the site, and so I grew up in community housing, which meant I had my nan next door and my dad's siblings all in the same street. My primary school, I had 15, 20 cousins in there. So although we didn't grow up on the site, it was very similar. And then I went to school. I went to secondary school. I didn't do very well, suffered a lot of bullying. I was a bully, you know, you turn into a bully. And so I left at 16 with not much qualifications, started a family in my early 20s. And then I was a florist for 15 years. I had a flower shop in Waltham Cross. I had Interflora, I had Tesco contracts. But, you know, I was very much a grassroots florist. So like making big gypsy flowers and always having things that connected with my community in the window, because so I had a lot of gypsy and traveller customers, because my trade is very respected there. And then in 2013, my dad died of cancer very quickly. He was given a terminal diagnosis. And so I decided to give something back. So I set up a social enterprise after my dad died to teach gypsy women floristry. And I taught the first session and I was like, wow, and what am I teaching them floristry? So much more I can do. So from there, it sort of grew. I went to Goldsmiths University when I was 36 and did a degree in community development, youth work and social science. And then I ended up, we got rid of the flower shop early on, 2015, and I ended up doing my degree, and now I work at Berkshire University. I'm doing a master's in education. In between, I do a lot of charity work. So yeah, that's kind of how I got here.
So why did you choose to study community development?
I always wanted to do a degree. I always wondered what was on the other side of university. Some people went to university, like this, solicitors, barristers, it for them. And so I went to I was teaching floristry, and I gave a lift to a community worker from an organisation in London. I gave her a lift while I was teaching floristry to the young people over there. And on the way, she talked to me about a degree she was doing at Goldsmiths in community development and how I'd be great for it. And it was very practically based. So I come home on the Monday, applied to the uni, and I already worked for a charity in Hertfordshire that was for gypsy and travellers doing community development. So it kind of fitted. And I went and did a degree, and I wasn't academic or anything. I got in on my floristry qualifications and sort of just learned it while I was there. And now my role at Bucks is supporting more gypsy, Roma and traveller into different universities. So actually it's come full circle. And, you know, as you'll hear from Ruby, I've got a daughter that's in uni. I am a student. I've worked in a uni, and so I'm sort of immersed in it now. I love my dad, and my dad was the running name, my mum isn't, and I think that gives me the benefit of being able to walk in both ways. And as an ode to my dad, I want to make sure that our culture goes forward. So I've done a lot of activism and a lot of quite public stuff across the UK over the last 5 or 6 years. So that's become a lot of who I am and what I do. So as a part of that, I set up a charity in Essex, Gypsy and Travellers Essex, and I have a seat at the Department for Education and the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government steering groups for Gypsy Roma travellers.
It seems like you're really a woman who's just not intimidated to just go forward and make positive changes in the world for your community.
No, not at all. I'm not intimidated at all. I treat people the same, and I've been asked about this a lot. I've had a full-blown rant with Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn, Boris, but that's no different to me than going on a site. I treat people exactly the same. I don't care if they're a parliamentarian or an academic, or, you know, that doesn't really intimidate me. And that doesn't make any difference if I'm going to see an illiterate elderly person on a site. I don't care. I take people at face value. So I suppose that's something quite unique about me, and that probably comes from my upbringing, being a gypsy and having to have this attitude whenever people, I mean, you get it every day. So having this attitude of not letting the world affect you, and I suppose that's kind of where I am. They don't intimidate me.
I've certainly felt really inspired when I've seen you speaking at a couple of Drive to Survive rallies.
Thing is, what I'm saying comes from my heart. It's my heart lived experience. So, you know, this matters to me, that it carries on with my children, my grandchildren. So I don't feel intimidated by that, because I feel like we need this platform. I feel like we haven't had it up to now.
So I know you are very proud of your 2 daughters, Ruby and Scarlett, and the strong women they've grown up to be. and we're lucky enough to actually have Ruby here today. So Ruby, you've chosen to study journalism.
Yeah, Liverpool John Moores. I've always had an interest in writing and getting news out to people. So I've been watching BBC News every single morning before school on the weekends since I was probably 8 or 9. And originally I wanted to be a doctor, an oncologist who deals with cancer because of the death of my granddad. But long story short, I didn't get the grades for that just because of COVID, just generally, like, I didn't really enjoy the sciences. So journalism was a plan B, but not in that I didn't enjoy writing, more in that it wasn't my first plan, but it's something that I love anyway. So it was always going to be journalism or medicine.
Ruby's a very gifted writer and has enjoyed reading and writing since she was a very small child. So, you know, Ruby right through school has won every single writing competition, and she's worked for the Travellers Times since she was about 13 doing writing. It's a real gift she has.
I took a politics A-level, and I think that was sort of what really interested me, because we had to read political magazines and, you know, watch the news every morning, which I've been doing anyway. And I thought, you know, that's a really good job. You get to report on what's going on, you get to make a change. Yeah, so I think it's important for everybody to have a degree or to go on a higher education in some form, but especially to people of the Gypsy and Traveller community, because we don't really get educated. We probably finish school with, you know, 13, 14, 15. And the only way we're ever going to change things and perceptions of us and, you know, law and everything else is to get into Parliament, to get into higher, well-paying jobs. And you're not going to do that unless you have a degree.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk a little bit about the policing bill and the Drive to Survive movement. So you co-founded this, didn't you, Sherry?
Yeah. 16th of May is Resistance Day for Roma genocide. I won't go on about it a lot, but in Auschwitz in 1944, the only known uprising during Auschwitz was that the Roma heard they were going to be liquidised, and they fashioned crude tools and they stood up against the Nazis on the 16th of May. So actually online this year, on the 16th of May, I was fuming about the policing bill and something else. So I messaged Jake Bowers and I just said, Jake, it's ridiculous, you know, like, we've got to stand up for this bill. So he said, okay, let's organise a rally, you know. And so we just decided on the 16th of May, we organised this rally, put in paperwork for the 7th of July, and the rest really has just happened completely organically. You know, we don't have any real funding. We had a little seed funding for Abode, but other than that, it's all crowdfunding. We don't have anybody who's paid. It's just people volunteering. Everything that's done is just done holistically with everybody, horizontally. So Ruby and my other daughter Scarlett and a lot of other young people have been involved. Drive to Survive is about bringing together different communities. So traditionally you would have the ethnic gypsies, which I am a Romany gypsy, Roma, which are the more recent ones for the UK, from some of them are second generation, but from Europe, and then travellers, ethnic travellers, but also with Drive to Survive who are involved in showmen, boaters, new travellers, ramblers, van dwellers. This is about everybody that Section 4 of the bill affects. And what we're trying to do is not just Drive to Survive, is, you know, 95% of gypsies don't live on the road. This is about the narrative, and this is about the survival of our culture. And we've been nomadic here in this country for 500 years. So we've been nomadic all over the world for over 1,000 years, and most of that has disappeared in Europe. So, you know, we really want to hold on to this because, you know, in the UK, we are unique. That's what sort of fired me on, is inspired. Like I said, it's like I want to make sure that my community gets to go forward in that. I live in a house, it doesn't directly affect me, but the narrative does, the prejudice that will follow it does. You know, defining ethnicity out of existence using legislation is very like what happened in the 1930s in Germany.
And I guess even if a lot of people with ethnic traveller heritage are settled, it's still part of your culture to travel, to go to events, to go to weddings, to go to like family gatherings and to travel in that way.
Well, if you take Appleby Fair, for example, every year Appleby Fair goes on. There's absolutely no organising, no tickets, no wristbands, no nothing. 30,000 people come there, that won't be able to happen. You know, those people take weeks to travel up on their horses. They need to be able to stay by the side of the road. There's stopping places that have been there for 300, 400, 500 years. This year, I made the journey up to Aberdeen and I stayed on some of those old traditional stopping places. And when I spoke to local publicans and locals, you know, they want that to continue. That's their, you know, that's their life as well. They grew up. I spoke to a publican, he was 75, and he said, I remember as a little boy the traveller stopping here. You know, it's a piece of our culture being eroded. It's not just about the civil trespass in Essex or the civil trespass in London. It's about, you know, those fairs and fates won't be able to go on. People can't risk those wagons being seized by the side of their road. And then also you have to look at families don't choose to live by the side of the road. You know, there's a severe limitations on how many site positions there are. If you do have the money to go and buy a piece of land, the chances are that it will be turned down on planning because, you know, that's the usual process. As soon as you apply for gypsy traveller status, people don't want that near them. There's nothing allowed for future generations. And nobody wants to travel by the side of the road and park on stalls. It's because there's nothing else. There's no transit sites, there's insufficient provision.
And I guess that's why changing the narrative is so important, because like you said, nobody wants to travel a site near them, but that is because it's a historic narrative that travellers are somehow morally less valuable than people who have settled, and that is what gives cause to people not being able to get their planning permission, or people, you know, being evicted really fast when they find a good place to be or whatever.
It's about the narrative that's set as well. I mean, okay, so this law is there to affect people who are travelling on the road. Okay, as this law is enforced and the amount of media and inches in the tabloids that it's had and across social media, what does this tell the rest of the UK? This says this government is so concerned about this one ethnicity that they're going to make a law that defines them out of existence. So what does that do? On the playground, that affects children. They suffer racism. You know, my children suffered racism, as Ruby can tell you, right the way through school. What will that do? It will make employment harder. When the newspapers are full of gypsies being convicted and their homes being seized and they're fined. And so this affects our everyday lives. We know we die 15 years younger. We know we have the worst outcomes at every key stage of education. We know that everything in health across the board, employment is worse. So why would they have those stakeholder groups, and why would they tell us that they're going to invest money in their own integration strategy? And then on the other hand, you know, example, 3 weeks ago, they gave 1.4 million to education for Berkshire travellers. How can you have a safe education when you've got nowhere to live, when you've got no home to go to, when there isn't a site for you and there's no council provision and you can't buy land? How can you live that? How can we tell our people to start improving their health when we can't get homes for them? We can't get somewhere for them to stay that's safe. They're not wanting to, that's clearly defined. Nobody ever said to me, do you live in a caravan, before they called me a pikey, before they treated me differently. How about you, Ruby?
I've never been asked, no. Like, the first thing I say to people when I say I'm a gypsy is, do you live in a caravan? And I go, no, I don't. And they go, you're not a gypsy then.
There's nothing taught on the curriculum about Roma genocide or the fact that we were involved in slavery hundreds of years ago, you know, being shipped to the Caribbean and everywhere else. That's not told in the history books. All the children see and all the adults see is what they see in the media. And the media follows this government, which the government says they don't want us. They want to define us out of existence.
I took a politics A-level and
that's really great to hear a little bit from some ethnic gypsies who, because obviously, you know, we're new travellers and we're talking in terms of new travellers, but, you know, there is a different story, and that is what she said, the narrative and them being legislated out of existence, and the narrative about travellers which affects their lives every day. And they've also founded this amazing movement, Drive to Survive, which has united new travellers and ethnic travellers in a way that hasn't really been done before. So we're going to have a really brief chat now with a friend of mine who some of you might recognise, Ray. We're going to keep it pretty quick, but I just wanted to say, because Ray is a Greenham woman, but she's also has lived most of her life as a new traveller, and in fact, was it wanting to be able to spend more time at Greenham which led you to get your first vehicle?
It was Amy, because I only rode motorbikes till I was about 35, and by then I was going up to Greenham quite a lot, like particularly to help out with evictions. And in the end, the evictions were terrible. We'd get evicted like sometimes twice a day, and they employed a full-time team of bailiffs, and they literally 5 days a week, those bailiffs drove round and round and round the perimeter of Greenham, just doing evictions all day. And sometimes there'd be 5 or 6 camps at different gates, so they were fully occupied. And hardly anyone had vehicles, you know, hardly anyone had a car. And I thought, I want to spend more time at Greenham, and I'm going to get a driving license and get my first truck so that I can be at Greenham, and then we can fill it up. When there was like a lot of evictions, you had to just save the bits that were important, like your water butts and the big pans and a bit of dry firewood. So that was definitely why I first got a truck, and I really had no idea that it would end up becoming such a full-on way of life until I was 61 when I moved into this house. So yeah, I've seen so much changes from like 86. I was parked up in Hume in 94, 95 when it was the criminal justice bill went through, and I've parked up a lot in Bristol over the years because I've worked on and off in Bristol. And driving up from Bristol, one year I worked for North Avon County Council, and I got recruited as a youth and community worker with 9 gypsy traveller sites across North Avon working with women and girls. And I was doing that part-time, and then I was going up to Greenham, up the old M4 for like camp at Greenham or Aldermaston Women's Peace Camp. So and then like years later I'm going back to Bristol, and it's so different. When I was parked up and doing that work with the Irish women, there was 3 of us, room for 3 trucks by a school, and the council put us in a portaloo and a big wheelie bin so that we could live there. We were all living there, we were all working, and we were right by the school kids. It was very harmonious. There wasn't any problems. Though, and so now you've got, it's been horrendous what's been happening in Bristol. I haven't been back for quite a while in my truck, but I sort of moved in a house, but I spent a lot of the time in the truck a lot of the time. Because Amy's site is just at the edge of my town, and my truck is down there, and people stay in it, and I go down for parties. So yeah, and the other thing that I would like to mention actually is that when I moved into the house here, and like Forest of Dean is a really like pretty cool place for travellers. There's really very little hassle. Would you agree?
I would agree, yeah.
And so I've lived and worked in the Forest of Dean over the years as well. In fact, I bought my first truck here, and it was a mobile fruit and veg shop. But I moved into this house and I got a hell of a lot of harassment. I was parking my truck round the corner, but opposite like a village hall that no houses. I was threatened. I was told I had no right to move here if I owned a vehicle like that, and I really was quite. I was retired, you know. I was 62, and I couldn't believe that. As I understood it, people don't want travellers and gypsies moving in next door to them anymore if you're in a house than if you're in a truck. And like literally my windscreen was painted over every inch of it like twice.
Well, it's another reason then why would they drive us out of our vehicles into houses if people don't really want us to live in the houses? Surely is another added reason why they should just let us be. I'm going to put it on to Lou. Thanks so much, Ray.
Yeah, I'm going to do a podcast with Amy because there's lots more to say. But yeah, it's so great to be here tonight and listen to you all.
So I just wanted to say there is a much longer version of that interview with Sherry and her daughter Ruby, and I'm going to be putting it out as a podcast on my podcast I Choose the Road. So if you did want to hear that in a bit more detail, that'll be there. And there is a more in-depth interview happening with Ray at some point soon. So now I'm going to hand over to Lou.
Right, oh, Ray, thank you for telling us your stories. It's so sad to hear that you're still getting grief at your age and moving into a settled community, and it just shows how much bigotry and prejudice there is out there, and we really. I'm going to tell you about nfATS. Some of the people here on the call will know about nfATS, but for those of you that don't, nfATS stands for No Fixed Abode Travellers and Supporters. It's a grassroots collective which campaigns and educates people just about issues just like this bill, the Police Crime Courts and Sentencing Bill. It's funded purely by generous donations and also by the sale of our clothing line. And it was originally set up as a Facebook group, linking us all together so that we could share information and knowledge. It enabled us to promote our skills and talents to one another, and it has also allowed us to share horrific experiences of hate, crime and prejudice that travellers still experience this day, as we just heard from Ray, and which are still unfortunately commonplace within our society. So the other thing nfATS does is it provides a support network for one another, so that if things go wrong, we put a call out and someone somewhere is able to provide the help or the resources that we need to continue along the way. So nfATS has got three main campaigns. The first one is to fight against the criminalisation of trespass. The second is to campaign for the continued right to roam. And the third is to end traveller prejudice. So we're fighting against traveller prejudice. So since its early days, nfATS has now progressed to a fully functioning roadshow, where it is a voice for travellers everywhere. We have a horse box hub with a small library, and we travel to festivals and events, setting up our home around a central fire pit and bringing with us a photographic exhibition, and also acoustic musicians and our crafts. We hold talks and we hold workshops and demonstrations which showcase the many skills and talents that we have to share. This year, though, we felt that it was really important to take our message out of the safe arena of the festivals and onto the road. So we began to occupy small bits of common land for just a few days. We brought our camp and our message to the general public in an attempt to build bridges with the settled population, whilst also educating them about the proposed new bill and what it will truly mean for us travellers, but also for people and their access to the land. So this bit of outreach was just so incredibly inspirational to me for a number of reasons. I mean, the first thing was that the people didn't mind us. In fact, they were happy to come and chat to us and find out what we were all about. They loved our music, they loved our information, and they loved the fact that we still cooked over fire. We caused a bit of a stir with the local WhatsApp group, as you know, there are many negative stereotypes about who travellers are and what we bring with us, so they did not know what to expect. It turned out, though, that only 4 of the 200 members were against us. They were obviously the most vocal, and they were the ones stoking up the hatred and prejudice and fear. But the figures didn't lie, and neither did our lived experience. We didn't have any problems the entire weekend. The media bias and the government myth that settled people can't live next to travellers is just that, a myth that really needs dispelling. So Ray's having a different experience. But so for me, generally, wherever I've lived, wherever I've parked up, I've been able to have good relationships with my neighbours that live on the street or in the settled community. And it is reassuring, that there are a lot of people out there that are open-minded and are friendly and are welcoming, or they just let you get on with things. And that's still really, really reassuring for me. The second thing about when we went out to do the outreach was that most people aren't actually really aware about, or they know very little about this bill and how it's going to impact upon everyone's life. Most people just see the scenes of the writing on the TV, for this is what the media controls how the information is told, and once again the media is failing to keep people informed. It's cherry picking the footage that they show from demonstrations, and it's failing to tell the true horror and cruelty of this bill. I mean, one of the other things that isn't related to travellers, but is related to, is part of this bill, is the powers of stop and search. Soon they will be able to stop individuals without even any suspicion that something criminal is occurring. Just being out on the streets is enough to justify the right to be searched. And this is a law that will impact predominantly upon the Black and ethnic minorities. You know, this bill is coming for us all. So we're talking to people about the bill when we were out doing outreach. After listening to the truth of this draconian bill, the first questions the locals always asked was, what can we do? Many of them offered to write to their MPs, for at that time the bill was in the Commons. However, because this bill is part of the Tory manifesto, it is just being rushed through without any regard for the many issues it entails, or the petitions, letters and requests of many who fear the passing of this bill. Many people recognise that this bill is just a further weapon to crush us, to crush not just travellers in the nomadic way of life, but all people, for it also removes our right to protest. So the progress of this bill at the moment is that after it went to the Parliamentary Select Committee, a number of amendments were suggested, and the Joint Committee on Human Rights raised concerns over both the Select Committee and the Joint Committee on Human Rights all raised concerns over human rights issues. However, the Tory party ignored all of these suggestions, despite the grave concerns that were raised by this committee. So currently, the bill is now in the House of Lords. After the last reading, many further concerns were raised. One Lord actually described this as no way to make laws, and there's a great article in the Bristol Cable by Hannah Vickers that gives you an insight into what the Lords actually think about this bill. Yesterday, on the 20th of October, the Lords began the committee stage, where they analysed line by line each section of this bill and any possible amendments. However, yesterday we were also sent the government's draft proposals on the guidance as to how the police will enforce this bill if it's passed next year as it's expected. And we are now being told that they are sneaking some of the unpalatable bits of this bill through as an amendment to the Criminal Justice Act, which will be ramping up police powers way beyond what they were before. This draft guidance doesn't appear to acknowledge any of the recommended amendments or concerns that have been raised. In fact, it makes me wonder if there really is any point to this bill being discussed, for the government seems determined to do exactly what they like. So on the 27th of October, the Lords will be discussing possible amendments to Section 4 of the bill, which is the section that intends to criminalise trespass. It would be nice if they voted to remove Part 4 entirely from this bill. However, we are not hopeful, because historically the Lords tend to give assent to the bills that are part of the government's manifesto. So on this day, I'm going to be travelling as part of the Drive to Survive network to Hofields Travel Site in Basildon, Essex. Initially, we were travelling to Dale Farm. Now, if any of you remember the Dale Farm campaign, that this was a large privately owned Irish traveller site, which was evicted by Basildon Council 10 years ago on the 19th of October. Despite the fact that these travellers own their land, they were forced to leave in a violent, destructive eviction, which left the land looking like a war zone. Despite the promises by the council to repair the damage they did when they dug up the roads and the pipes so the land could no longer be inhabited, 10 years on, it still looks like a war zone. However, is once again repeating this harassment of travellers. Again, they are forcibly evicting them. Actually, is currently in prison for 7 months for refusing to move off his own land. And that is why Drive to Survive are travelling to Hove Fields Traveller site in Basildon. And if anybody wants to come and show solidarity, then you are welcome. We're meeting there at 12 o'clock on the 27th of October. And then we'll be going to Basildon Council to demonstrate outside their offices. So the irony of this council actions is that there really is nowhere for us to go. We're not allowed to live on our own land, and now the act of trespass will criminalise us. I keep asking, whatever happened to the Lord's Prayer, for it states, forgive us our trespasses. Where is the trespass? What are we expected to do? For in England, we only have access to 8% of the land. The rest is owned by the usual suspects, the Crown, the Church, and of course the military. And surprisingly, a large amount of land is owned by the grouse shoot. So where is our place? To make matters worse, in 2026, a new land grab is underway. From the 1st of January 2026, the definitive maps, the Ordnance Survey maps, are being redrawn. And any pathways, bridleways, byways, parking places and common land that are not recorded will now be lost. The public will no longer have access to the places that they have walked for years. There is a great book called Restoring the Records by a guy called Phil Wadey. It really explains about this and how imperative it is that we all check that the land we walk on, travel to, or just enjoy are on the map still. And if they aren't, this book will explain to you just how you can record them with the council, so that in the future, you and your grandchildren will continue to enjoy these places. When I visited Greenham Common for the first time this year, during the 40th anniversary celebrations, I was completely blown away. Despite knowing some of the history and remembering as a child the TV reports of what the Greenham women were up to, and the presence of the cruise missiles and the American airbase on UK soil, it had not fully registered that the actual presence of the Greenham women, their tireless campaigning and continued presence on the common have resulted in not only the removal of the weapons and the Americans, but eventually the complete return of the commons to the people. This was so inspiring, and I feel it is a precedent for the return of more military land to the people. For why in this age of drone warfare, microchips and viruses do we really need the military? And do they really need that much land anymore? I left Greenham feeling that yes, one day we might get our commons back and the rest of the land that was taken from us during the enclosures, for it was our land, it was everyone's land. And with this realisation, and we need to know that we are the ones who have been trespassed against, and that we may have forgiven, but we have not forgotten. And now is the time that the truth must get out to the masses. Travellers have been scapegoated for too long, and I believe groups like nfATS and Drive to Survive can help to set the record straight. When we went to Manchester to the Tory party conference, Drive to Survive was able to negotiate with the City Council and the police a piece of disused land on prime real estate right in the centre of town. They secured the land for us to stop on for an agreed amount of time, and it meant that none of us had to trespass. We could all gather there together during our time in Manchester with our vehicles safe, and when it was time to go, we left the land as we'd agreed, and we left no trace. In Manchester demonstrated that it was possible to work with travellers, and that there are places that can be used whilst empty to provide a home for our homes. This to me is another precedent, and I believe that the government really needs to reconsider why it is determined to continue with this bill, because Drive to Survive and Manchester City Council have demonstrated that another way is possible. Another way without taking our homes, our money, and imprisoning us. And so I wonder why the government is hell-bent on creating criminals out of us when they could be creating solutions for us, or enabling us to bring our own solutions. So really that just leaves me to wonder what this bill is actually really about. So yeah, so really that's what we wanted to say. And Jelly's now going to do a poem, and then after that, if anyone wants to ask questions with me, look, we'd be happy to answer them for you.
Sorry, I was muted then. Can you hear me? I think so.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to do a poem called This Land is Our Land. I'm just showing a slide there which has a notice to leave Minchinhampton Common, which is right next to the common in that original photo I showed you where I was being evicted from the common as a probably about 4-year-old. So if we go up to the common now, we'll probably get one of these after, if we're lucky, a few weeks, sometimes a few days. And they've put up these signs all over the common as well. And this is a poem about, about this land being our land, and being asked to move, and the criminalisation of trespass. This land is our land. I was born on this land and I'll die on this land. When I die, I'll become part of this land. I am part of this land, so I'll park on this land. So when you tell me to move and I say we won't be here long, we're keeping it tidy and I'm used to this now, even though I've got nothing to prove, and you say something which basically amounts to your existence is against the rules, then I have to explain to you that the bylaws on your bit of paper, well, I simply don't believe in them. Yes, I will leave, but trust me, I'll be back again. Because this land is our land, and I lived here when I was 4. I lived here when I was 24. I'll probably be here when I'm 34, and at least once a year for the rest of my life, so I'm sure you can understand why I don't believe in your bylaws. Because this land is our land. I was born on this land, and I'll die on this land. When I die, I'll become part of this land. I am part of this land, so I'll park on this land. You called me a stupid hippie, probably think I'm sponging off the state. Well, I wouldn't care if I was, but you're an ignorant knob. Don't stick around to find out that I've lived here for years. I've got a degree and a full-time job. You're probably having a bad day, you've got a bee in your bonnet, but don't take it out on me, you ridiculous wrong'un. So then I parked up on the common in the same place we lived when I was 4, but now they've put a height barrier in so that I can't park there anymore. I once went to a party at a quarry in Derbyshire. My mum said that we'd lived there once before, but we wouldn't get away with that now because our freedom's against the law. But this land is our land. I was born on this land and I'll die on this land. When I die, I'll become part of this land. I am part of this land, so I'll park on this land. The rich man won't allow it, the farmer won't allow it, National Trust won't allow it, English Heritage won't allow it, the council don't provide it, I can't afford to buy it. And even if I could, I wouldn't be able to get planning permission. So why is it so rotten? Because we're not involved in making all these decisions. So make trespass a criminal offence, let the landowner shoot those who climb his fence, put the travellers in jail, fine the walkers and caution wild campers because living on the land is a crime. Our human rights are rapidly being decimated. Where's the world we created? Well, it's the apocalypse now, dear. How did we get here? When this land is our land, I was born on this land and I'll die on this land. When I die, I'll become part of this land. I am part of this land, so I'll park on this land. Thank you.
Oh, that was so wonderful.
Yay!
Woo.
Thank you.
So I think we're coming to the end of this webinar. And I think it's been so powerful, so moving, so informative. And in the chat, I've been asked to ask you again, can you say really clearly this, on the 27th of October, you're wanting to do something in Basildon, Basel Council. Can you say where exactly and what time exactly? And if possible, can you write it into the chat and make sure that you make it to go to all, to the everyone not just the host and panelists.
I'll do that, Lou. If you say it, I'll write it.
Okay, so it's at Hove Field Sites. That's HOVEFIELDS site, and that's Hove Fields Avenue. It's just off the H127 near Wickford and near Basildon, and we're meeting there at midday. I'm not quite certain what time we're going to Basildon Council yet, but I imagine if you check out the Drive to Survive website, then they will. That's drive2survive.com. They will have the information there for you. And yeah, it would be lovely if anyone wants to come down and show solidarity. Or also check out the nfATS. www.nfats.info. That's you can also check it out there. You can check out on the nfATS Facebook group. If those could go into the chat as well, Amy, that would be good. Then you'll get the you'll be able to find the exact times and details.
So while Amy's doing that, thanks, Lou. I just want to really enormous thanks to Lou and Jelly and Amy, and also it was great to listen to Sherry and her daughters and to other of the interviews. I just remember sitting at the Orange Gate fire with Lou and her telling me all about this and saying, you know, could they do one of the weaving the webinars that we were putting online, and of course I said yes, and we've managed to make this happen. We're all still kind of learning, so I'm sorry there was some Eventbrite problems at the beginning, but this has just been incredible. It's just been so beautiful and powerful and moving, and thank you. I also wanted to thank Greenham Women Everywhere, because you can find more of the information, and we'll see if we can actually put up, if you send if you can send me the PDFs of your PowerPoints. We'll see if Greenham Women Everywhere can put them on the website, because this has been recorded, and the recording is going to go up onto Matt is going to do his magic and turn it into something that can be seen and heard on the Greenham Women Everywhere YouTube channel, and then you can just send people the links, and you know, forever they'll be able to kind of catch up with this. And as well as thanking Greenham Women Everywhere, I want to also thank Maypole Fund, which has been was a fund set up by Greenham Women quite a number of years ago, and because they've helped to enable some of the webinars to happen, and but generally to finish by saying thank you to the amazing number of people who came to this, and to all of you, Lou, Jelly, Amy, and Ray, you know, for
Thank
speaking,
you for inviting us.
to us. It's just been wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. So with that, I'm going to end this webinar, but don't forget, look on the chat, please, because Amy has put this into the chat, and you can just save it for you before I actually switch the whole thing off, and then we'll make sure that also hopefully goes up on you know, on the Greenham Women Everywhere website. So thank you and good night. Recording stopped.